stuff. Thank you. I forgot all about it. We're going to go over some basic genetic stuff. We're going to first just talk about some vocab. Make sure you guys are all set with the vocab. I'm going to remind you on the best way to answer like Punnett square type of questions. And then we're going to spend a minute talking about pedigrees because I think that, did we even cover that in this class?
I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, you know, I think that was one of the things that I chose. I shouldn't be recording myself saying this. That's one of the topics that I chose to not really focus on in class because all of the pedigree questions on MCAS you can do without knowing a lot about pedigrees, but I think if you've at least been exposed to it, it'll make you a lot more comfortable, all right? So let's get through some of the general stuff first, and then we're going to finish up with some information on pedigrees to help you guys out. Now, if you looked at the open responses that I put on that answer sheet for your take-home test, it should have made perfect sense on how to answer the pedigree problem. But if you're still having a tough time with it, over the weekend when you're studying for MCAS, like I know you're all going to do, send me an email and I can help you out with it, okay? But let's just do some general stuff first. Vocab is huge in genetics. Somebody raise your hand and tell me what a gene is. Annalise.
It is a sequence of DNA that, nope, I lied. It's two copies. Nope, I am not in the right thing.
You were saying the right thing the first time.
Oh, I was?
Yeah.
Sequence of DNA that codes for a protein and determines a trait.
When you're looking at a chromosome, this is actually like thousands and thousands and thousands of DNA of genes, okay? You have a whole bunch of DNA actually smushed into this little chromosome structure. A gene, there are different lengths of genes because there are different size proteins. A gene is any segment of DNA, no matter how long or how short, to be the entire code for a protein, okay? One chromosome, you have many genes. All right, so what's an allele? Raise your hand. What is an allele? Must know genetic vocab, so if you don't know, grab a book and look. Dana, you just saved your whole class.
I think it's like, you have the transfer and the letters on top, and then the dominant and the recessive.
True, you're on the right track. What about pure vocab terms?
Different forms of a gene resulting in a different characteristic.
They're just different forms of a gene. Now, we share 99.9% of the same DNA, but that little bit of DNA sequence that's different between us is because of different alleles. So if this is a gene, maybe it's AATTGGCC, but a different form of that gene could be AATTCCCG. That one little DNA change is enough to actually cause two different effects, okay? All right, a couple of other sets of terms that I forgot to write up right up here, even though they're really important. Genotype and phenotype. Somebody raise your hand and explain these two terms for me. Good, I'm glad to see a lot of hands up here. Anybody need the point?
I think the genotype is the letters, the
Yeah. The genotype is the genetic makeup, which we can represent as single letters. It's what gene do you have? Do you have the CCC or do you have the CCG? The genotype is the genetic makeup. The phenotype is what you actually see. It's the physical characteristic. It's the trait. It's the outcome of the gene, okay? Now continuing on with some of this vocab.
Wait, is the phenotype the thing you see or the genotype?
Yeah, the phenotype is what you see, the physical. So think of it this way. Phenotype, physical characteristic. Genotype, genetic makeup, okay? Now, what about dominant versus recessive?
Dominant is the stronger allele, and it's represented in a capital letter.
True.
And recessive is a weaker allele, which is a lowercase letter.
True.
Also the dominant allele is like shown in the phenotype. Like if the dominant was brown eyes, you'd see brown eyes, and then recessive you can still have the gene, but you don't see it in the phenotype.
True. So in recessive, you have to have 2 copies of the recessive in order to see that phenotype. But with your dominant, as long as there's 1 copy of the dominant allele, that's the phenotype you'd see. So we're still under genetics, but if you go back to the right underneath transcription and translation, it should say Mendelian genetics. This is considered Mendelian genetics. Don't forget, Gregor Mendel was the guy who figured a lot of this stuff out in his pea plants before we knew anything about DNA. All right. So as we said, your dominant allele is usually represented by a capital letter. Your recessive allele is usually represented by a lowercase letter. And pure genetics says, no, don't forget, you have 2 copies of every gene in most of your cells. If you have this genotype, you're going to show the dominant phenotype. If you have this genotype, you're going to show the dominant phenotype. If you have this genotype, that's the only time you see the recessive phenotype. Okay? Alright, now in terms of what I just wrote, and these 2 are words, what is homozygous and what is heterozygous?
Homozygous is when you have 2 identical alleles for a trait, and heterozygous is when you have 2 different alleles.
Yep, and you need to know the vocab because usually the problems you're going to see on MCAS will say things like a mother is homozygous dominant for a certain trait, father is homozygous recessive, what kind of children are they going to have? You need to know what that vocab means, okay? Somebody raise your hand, tell me, is this homozygous or heterozygous?
Homozygous?
Homozygous dominant or recessive?
Dominant. Heterozygous? Homozygous recessive.
Good, that's the must-know vocab. Questions about that? Okay, a couple more things, then we're going to get to pedigrees. I'm going to speed it up a little here. All right. Now, we didn't focus too much on these next 2 terms, but you need to know what they are. So if you're not really sure, make sure you're jotting this down. What do I mean by autosomal versus sex-linked? And they go together. All right, let me start it this way then. What determines your sex? What determines whether you're a male or a female? Raise your hands. Good, 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 good. Who needs the point? Okay, so if you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, it's actually 22 pairs of chromosomes and then your sex chromosomes. Your sex chromosomes can either be homozygous, if you're XX, you're homozygous. Is that a boy or girl? XY would be male. Now sometimes you'll see the terms autosomal and sex-linked. Autosomal means it's a gene on the 22 non-sex pairs of chromosomes. Sex-linked just means it's a gene that's either on the X or the Y. Now the reason why that's important is this. If there's a disease that's and there are several diseases like this. If there is a disease whose gene is found on the X chromosome, right here on the X chromosome, a disease gene, you have to be, it's recessive, so you have to be homozygous recessive to have that disease. If you're a female and you have one good gene and one bad gene, you're not going to have the disease because you have one good X chromosome to be dominant. But the problem is for all you guys, for these sex-linked, X-linked genes is this. If you receive the disease X from your mother, you automatically have the disease because you do not have a second X to sort of counter it, okay? So the MCAS questions will never get too into sex-linked traits, but you should be aware of what those terms mean. Autosomal would be any chromosome that's not a sex chromosome. Sex-linked would be either something on the X or the Y, okay? Questions? All right. Now I'm going to ask you, especially because it's been a while since we've done genetics. I don't care how great you are at genetics. I don't care how many times you get A's in my class. Please follow these instructions for answering Punnett square problems. Write down the genotypes of your parents. Make sure you record or you know what's dominant and what's recessive. Make sure if you're being asked phenotype, you don't answer genotype, and vice versa. So here's what I want you to do. I'm just going to, off the top of my head, throw out a genetics problem. I want you to write down all the relevant information and then do the Punnett square. If tall plants are dominant to short plants, and while I'm playing in my garden, I decide to cross a short plant with a plant that's heterozygous tall, what are the possible phenotypes of the offspring? Do you want me to repeat it, or do you know the answer?
Wait, just the two plants that we're putting together?
Yeah.
Wait, no, like, could you repeat them?
All right. So I have, I don't remember exactly what
Was
I
it
said.
a short
Tall is dominant to short. I have a short plant that I'm crossing with a heterozygous tall plant.
Oh, okay.
What are the phenotypes of the offspring, okay? So the first thing you want, I don't care if it takes extra time, you guys have unlimited time for MCAS, take the extra time, okay? First thing you wanna do, write down what's dominant and recessive. Somebody raise your hand and tell me what's dominant, what's recessive.
Capital is dominant, lowercase recessive.
Tell me by phenotype though.
Tall is dominant, small is recessive.
Good, so tall, and then we'll use the lowercase t for short. Then you always want to write down what each parent is, and for plants you don't really care which one's the maternal and paternal parent, but that's okay. What is one of the genotypes for the first parent?
Lowercase d, lowercase d,
How do you know?
as it's short plant.
If it says short, there's only one genotype it can have, and that would be homozygous recessive. Then it says I'm crossing it with a heterozygous tall.
Uppercase T, lowercase t.
And if I want to know the phenotypes of the offspring, you do your Punnett square, you fill it in. What is my possible phenotype ratio for the offspring? 50% short, 50% tall. Please, 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 it's like doing a math test. Has anybody ever gotten something wrong in a math test because you add like 1 + 1 incorrectly? If you haven't, then hopefully it never happens to you, but I think it happens to the best of us. If you do this, you're gonna have a less of a chance of making a silly mistake, okay? I also wanna remind you guys about double Punnett squares. If you are given any kind of double Punnett square problem, honestly, the biggest thing you have to know is how to separate your gametes. So if I told you I was dealing with two genes, tall and let's say large seeds versus small seeds. If I told you that's what the parents' genotypes were for these two genes, and I wanted to know the possible gametes, what are the possible gametes?
Uppercase t, lowercase t, uppercase t, lowercase s, uppercase t, uppercase s, uppercase t, lowercase s, lowercase t, uppercase s, lowercase t, lowercase s.
The thing is, you want to realize whether you have one gene, two genes, or 20 genes. Each gamete gets one copy of each gene. So you do not want to do what you started off saying. You don't want to say that's one of the gametes, because what happened to the S gene? You just want to make sure you separate your gametes so you have one of each type of gene in your gametes. And then if you needed to do that in a Punnett square, it's a double Punnett square. You're still putting TS, T little s, little. Instead of 4 squares, you have many, many other squares. All right, but you would still treat it the same way. You would still fill it in the same way. That makes sense? Questions? All right, we have 10 minutes to do pedigrees. That's enough time. Consider this new notes, even though I promised you we were done with new notes. Pedigrees. It's a simple way to show a genetic family tree. And There are certain rules of pedigrees that are always true, no matter how complex the pedigree. Oh my gosh, I just almost grabbed a Sharpie. Pedigrees show males as squares, females as circles. Pedigrees show the disease that's being studied as being shaded in. So if you have the disease, the phenotypic disease, you'd be shaded in. So it doesn't have to be a disease either, it could be blue eyes, okay? If I said I'm studying blue eyes, if you have blue eyes and you're a girl, that's what you're gonna look like on a pedigree. Other things you wanna know about a pedigree: when you see a horizontal line, that indicates mating. Mom and dad. I know you don't want to think about that too much, but tough. Mating. The vertical lines represent the offspring. So if I have a male without the disease, or the condition, whatever, and a mother, the maternal parent with the disease, and they have 3 babies. The babies are shown. There's their son, there's their second son, there's their third son. And maybe the second one has the disease. Horizontal shows their mating, vertical shows their offspring. Now usually your pedigrees get a little more, are you pecking a finger at me? I'm just kidding. You realize what you're just doing now? Okay, you should delete that from the recording. Alright, the other thing you usually see on pedigrees is further matings. So this is my family, but if all of a sudden my son marries somebody, they're going to be shown. I don't want you to think it's a different color, but I'm just trying to show you these are the offspring from the original mating. This is the woman that married into that family. Okay? Make sure you're paying attention. Now if these two have babies, you would continue on from there. Maybe this daughter has the disease. Kinds of questions you're going to see on MCAS will be this. You'll be given a pedigree. You saw one on your practice test. You'll be given a pedigree. You'll be told a little bit of information, maybe. Like maybe you'll be told it's autosomal recessive. Maybe you have to come up with that, okay? But I'm going to show you an example, and it's very similar to what you saw on that practice test. Go ahead and on your sheet draw me this pedigree. When I get mad at Adam, that's what I do. I pretend I'm scratching myself, but I do that on purpose, so I couldn't resist. The other day, now that Kelsey's almost 21, I'm like loosening up a little bit. I'll do stuff like that in front of her. The other day we're at a restaurant and Adam was making us both mad, and so we were both doing that, and then the waitress came over and looked at us like, wow, what is wrong with this family? Very awkward. Definitely deleting all of this from the video.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the pedigree really is bringing together all of the stuff in genetics, and you're going to see exactly what I mean, okay? If I'm given this pedigree, and I'm told that the gene we're studying is recessive, and I want to know what the genotype is for this person, you can figure it out. First thing you want to do is fill in the easy stuff. Looking at that pedigree, if I tell you it's a recessive trait, what is the easy stuff to fill in?
Well, the shaded one.
Why?
Smaller. Shaded one is the only one that can have disease smaller.
If you're told it's recessive, the very first thing you want to do is fill in all the shaded people. So let's use little m's. You know this is little m, it would not have the disease if it was not homozygous recessive by the definition of recessive. And you know this is little m. Now, I know the rules of probability don't always work out perfectly, but they're gonna give you enough information on MCAS so you can answer these questions, okay? Assuming they had 50 kids and they all were not affected, okay? They only show 3 kids. This is offspring 1, 2, and 3. This is the woman that offspring number 3 has children with, okay? So of these children from this mating, are any of them homozygous recessive? No, they'd be shaded in if they were. Can you tell from first glance if this is homozygous dominant or heterozygous? No, but if you think about it a little bit, you can, because here's the deal. If this parent was heterozygous, every offspring's gonna get a little m from dad. But if mom was heterozygous, you would expect 50% of the offspring to get the dominant allele, and you would expect 50% of the offspring to get that recessive allele. So you would expect at least one of the children to be shaded in, and they're not. So with that logic, what is the genotype of this parent?
Well, that's theoretical, right?
Again, with MCAS, and sometimes they'll ask you that, like in that test, they'll ask you why didn't it work out perfectly like your Punnett squares, but on MCAS they're not going to give you a pedigree unless you're assuming that is unless you're assuming the theory is correct, okay? So assuming all of their babies are going to be like this, what is the genotype of this parent?
Homozygous dominant.
If it's homozygous dominant, that means every single offspring is getting a capital M and a little m. None of them would be affected. All right. Now we know that this man mates. Thank you. You know that this man mates with a woman who does not have the disease, but they have a child with the disease. Pay attention to me, not the video camera. If these parents have this child, what does her genotype have to be?
Uppercase and lowercase and some heterozygous.
If this mother was homozygous dominant, none of the babies would have the disease because all of them would have a dominant allele. Does that make sense? You sick of this? You're like, I'm out of here?
Yeah.
All right, see you ladies. Does that make sense? That's the extent of what you're going to be asked on MCAS about pedigrees. Now, sometimes they will not tell you if it's autosomal. More likely, they're not going to tell you if it's dominant or recessive, but they'll give you some of these genotypes so you can still, it's like trial and error with pedigrees. You want to try homozygous dominant, see if it works. If it doesn't work, you'll know right away. All right? Any questions about this? Go ahead.
What would be the genotype for the second child?
So this child right here,
Yeah.
if it helps, don't ever hesitate. I mean, you have unlimited time. Do a Punnett square. Big M, big M, big M, little m.
Wait, doesn't the other kid have to be a lowercase m? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Thank you, that was the wrong one. This child right here is this. So do you know what number 2 is? You might see that kind of question on MCAS. What is this child, or can you tell what this child is? And your answer would be, this child could be either one of these, and show the Punnett square and say refer to the Punnett square, the 1-to-1 ratio. But again, they're not going to give you a question on MCAS that you cannot easily figure out this way. Okay? Any other questions or comments? All right, you guys were really patient today. I appreciate it. Those of you that I picked on, Casey, I'm sorry. All right.
Every class you